haven't talked about this in years. People don't really want to hear stories like this. They want closure, a clean ending, a solution they can laugh about or file away under weird stuff. I can't give them that. I never got an answer, just a before and after. This happened 4 years ago, in the winter of 2021, when I was trying to put my life back together, or maybe break it apart in peace. At the time, it was hard to tell the difference. After the divorce, I didn't want to be around anyone. My house in Charlotte felt like a museum, hers and mine, full of photos and drawers and half-finished projects. My friends were supportive, but tiptoed around me. Nobody says it, but divorce makes people nervous. They think it's contagious. I needed silence, clean air, space to be miserable without feeling like I was wasting someone else's time. So I called an old high school buddy, Nick. He was managing properties out in the Smoky Mountains, mostly vacation homes and seasonal cabins. I wasn't looking for a vacation, but I remembered he'd mentioned a private place once, somewhere off the grid. He hesitated before offering it. This place isn't on the listings. Old family-owned spot, not maintained anymore, but I check it every few months. No Wi-Fi, no electricity. Might get cell service if you climb a tree. You sure you want something that remote? Yes, I said. He emailed me the directions and added, "Don't be alarmed if it creaks. Place is older than life itself." It took me the better part of a day to get there. The last 20 miles were narrow gravel paths, winding through snow-covered pines. I passed a broken sign halfway swallowed by weeds that read, "Mossback Hollow." No towns, no houses, just forest. The cabin itself was tucked between a stand of spruce and the slope of a low mountain. It looked forgotten, slumped slightly to the left, like it had survived one too many storms. The windows were fogged from the inside. The snow was knee-deep and undisturbed. No footprints, no tire tracks. It was exactly what I wanted. The inside smelled like dry wood and age. Dust clung to everything. There was a single-room main floor with a small kitchen counter, a wood-burning stove, a rickety table, and a ladder leading up to a low loft. The loft wasn't much, just a mattress on the floor, a few crates, and a narrow triangular window. The rafters were exposed up there, thick wooden beams crisscrossing the ceiling, like the bones of something ancient. I didn't think twice about it then. The first 2 nights passed without much to say. I read by the lantern light, scribbled thoughts in a notebook, chopped wood, and walked the trails around the ridge. I felt myself decompressing slowly, like I could breathe again without clenching my teeth. But then, the third night. I had gone to bed early, stretched out on the mattress in the loft. The fire downstairs still glowed faintly. I was drifting, somewhere between sleep and awake, when I heard it. Creak. A long, low groan from the rafters above me. At first, I figured it was the cabin settling. Wood bends in the cold. But then there was another sound, softer but closer, like something brushing against the beam just above my head. A dry scrape, like cloth on old wood. I opened my eyes. The lantern was still lit, casting shadows across the ceiling. I looked up and saw nothing, just rafters and cobwebs. But I felt wrong and watched. Not the way you feel in a city when someone's behind you. This was deeper, primal, like being in the woods and realizing the silence means something is listening. I got up, climbed down, and slept on the floor near the fire. Over the next few nights, the sound returned, always from the rafters, always after midnight. Sometimes it was a soft tap, sometimes the groaning of wood, like something heavy had shifted. Once I heard a dull, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat trapped in timber. I tried to brush it off, told myself it was animals, squirrels maybe, or wind. But on the 7th day, I heard footsteps. I stepped outside that morning to collect more woods. The snow had fallen fresh overnight, powdery and undisturbed. But as I rounded the side of the cabin, I stopped cold. There, beneath the loft window, I found where the sound had come from. There were prints in the snow, barefoot, human, and small. They started at the tree line, approached the cabin, stood just beneath the window, and stopped. No return trail, no signs of a jump or fall, just there and gone. I walked out and followed them back toward the forest. but they faded after about 20 feet. It was like the snow had swallowed them, or like something had stepped out of the woods, inspected the cabin, and stepped back in. That night, I barricaded the loft ladder with a chair. I didn't go up anymore. Something about being near the rafters made my skin crawl. I kept the fire going bright, drank until I was groggy, and laid down on the main floor wrapped in blankets. Around 2 a.m., I heard something come down the ladder. Creak, thump, creak. It paused halfway, when the chair scraped, slow and deliberate, across the floor. I was frozen, eyes wide open but not moving. I kept telling myself, don't react, don't let it know you're awake. Something moved past me. I didn't see it, but I felt the air shift. I heard the tiniest rustle of cloth, something breathing low and close. Then, a whisper. Not in words, just a dry sound, like breath passing through old teeth. A wet click, a sigh. I don't know how long it lingered. Eventually, the noises retreated. The ladder creaked again. Then silence. I decided to leave the next morning. No hesitation. I didn't pack much, just the essentials. I was too scared to go back upstairs. But the storm came in before dawn. A real one. Howling winds, thick snow, trees groaning under the weight. The road was buried, and the truck wouldn't start, with no signal. I was stuck. I sat by the stove that night with every lantern lit, axe in hand, staring at the loft ladder. The sound started at midnight, creaking, dragging, movement in the ceiling beams, then something worse, a thud directly above me, and another, and another. Something was crawling along the rafters, heavy and awkward, like a person who'd forgotten how to move like a person. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the lantern flickered. Then, one of the beams groaned and cracked. I looked up, and for the briefest moment I saw it. A shape hunched along the rafter, too thin and too long. Its limbs wrapped around the beam like a spider, head cocked sideways, watching me. Its face was pale and tight, like stretched leather. No eyes, just skin where eyes should be. And it smiled. I ran out the door into the storm. I didn't care that it was snowing sideways. I sprinted through the dark until I found the ranger station a few miles down the fire road. I must have looked insane. I barely remember what I said. The ranger drove me to town and had my truck towed. I never went back. Nick texted me a year later. Said someone else had bought the place, renovated it, turned it into an Airbnb. He said, funny thing, guest last week said the rafters creaked all night. Sent me a photo. He included it. It was a blurry shot of the loft ceiling. Most of it was dark, but in the upper corner, just barely caught in the lantern glow, was a shape tucked against the beam. A long arm, a hand too thin, fingers curled just over the edge. We'd gone up to a cabin to just get away from the noise. Me, my boyfriend Chris, and our German shepherd Duke. Just a long weekend in the woods, somewhere we could hike, cook over a fire, and not think about emails or meetings or the screaming neighbors next door. At least, that was the plan. But I need you to understand something before I go on. Duke was a good dog. Sweet, protective, loyal. Never barked for no reason. Never growled at strangers. He slept at the foot of our bed, walked off leash, let toddlers pet his ears at the park. He wasn't just a dog. He was family. And I trusted him more than most people I've ever met. So when he changed, when something got into him up at the cabin, it broke something inside me, and I don't think I'll ever get it back. The cabin was buried deep in the national forest, at the end of a rough dirt road our little car barely handled. There was no cell service, no Wi-Fi, and no neighbors for miles, just pine trees, a cold creek, and silence. We got there Friday afternoon, with enough food for 3 days and a big stack of horror novels I never ended up touching. Duke immediately took to the place, ran around sniffing trees, splashing through the shallow creek, tail wagging. I remember saying, I think he likes it more than we do. Chris laughed. He's never going to want to leave. We had no idea how right he was. That night was peaceful. We built a fire, opened a bottle of wine, and let Duke curl up by the hearth. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of growling. Not loud, just low and constant, like the engine of a car idling in the dark. It took me a minute to realize it was Duke, sitting stiff and alert at the foot of our bed, ears up, eyes fixed on the front door. I whispered his name, but he didn't move. Chris sat up groggy. "Oh, what's he doing? Something outside?" He got up, walked to the door and opened it. There was nothing there, just cold, empty woods. Duke didn't stop growling until sunrise. The next morning, Chris made eggs. I made coffee, and Duke seemed back to normal, running circles outside, chasing squirrels, chewing sticks. But when I said, "We should hike to the overlook," something shifted. Duke froze mid-step, just stopped and stared at me. And then he barked, once and loud, not playful, not excited. It was like a warning. Chris laughed nervously. He's getting territorial. But when we tried to walk down the trail, Duke blocked the path, head low, tail stiff, body tense. He wouldn't budge. If we tried to go around him, he'd growl, bare his teeth. I tried to leash him, and he snapped at me. I'd never seen him do anything like that before. Never even heard him growl at me, let alone bare his teeth. I stared at him dumbfounded, trying to understand what had just happened. We gave up and stayed close to the cabin. I chalked it up to new surroundings, maybe a scent in the woods that was throwing him off. But it didn't feel right. Something in him had turned. We locked Duke in the mudroom that night. He'd been pacing all afternoon, circling the cabin, occasionally letting out these strange, deep whoofs that didn't even sound like him. Chris and I were tense. We didn't talk much. Every time I looked out the window, I felt like the trees were closer than they had been before. And at around 1 a.m., we heard scratching on the mudroom door. It wasn't frantic, just soft, persistent scraping, like fingernails on wood. Chris got up to check. He opened the door a crack and peeked in. "What?" he muttered. "What?" "He's just sitting there in the dark, staring at the door." He shut it quickly. I whispered, "He's never acted like this, Chris." "I know." Neither of us slept. We decided to leave early. We woke up before sunrise, packed everything as quietly as we could, and didn't let Duke out of the mudroom. I felt sick locking him in there, but we were starting to feel trapped, like something invisible was hanging over the house. Chris grabbed the keys and headed out to the car, while I opened the mudroom and clipped the leash on Duke. He came with me, stiff and silent. But the second he saw Chris open the car door, he lost it. He lunged so hard he nearly ripped the leash from my hand. He barked, snarled, foam on his lips. He drove Chris back into the cabin, biting the air, straining like he wanted to kill something. I yanked hard and got him under control. Barely. Chris slammed the door and locked it. "What is going on, Sarah?" I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with him." We tried again later, after he calmed, but he wouldn't let either of us near the car, not without losing his mind. It was like he was guarding us, or guarding the cabin. That night, I stared at Duke from across the living room. He wasn't lying down anymore, just stood in the center of the room, watching us, head low, breathing slowly. Chris whispered, "What if he doesn't let us leave?" The question felt ridiculous, but it wasn't. Not anymore. We were afraid of our dog. The worst part is, he still looked like Duke. His body, his fur, his eyes. But something behind those eyes was different. Gone like a light had gone out and been replaced with something colder. Something that didn't blink. Monday morning, the snow started. Thick, wet flakes falling in heavy silence. Chris said we had to try. He distracted Duke with food while I made a run for the car. I got in, started it, threw open the passenger door. Duke heard the engine and lost it. He slammed into the screen door so hard the frame cracked. Chris tried to hold him back, but he was too strong. He chased me to the car, and I barely slammed the door in time. He jumped up on the hood, snarling, paws hammering the windshield. I screamed. Chris ran out and managed to drag him off. That was it. We didn't try again. That night, we didn't light a fire. We sat in the cold dark holding each other, Duke lying silently at the base of the door. I whispered, "Do you think we're going to die here?" Chris didn't answer. We waited, slept in shifts, and snow kept falling. And then, just before dawn, Duke stood up, walked to the door, sat, barked once, soft, like it was okay now. We left in the gray light of the morning. He let us pack the car. He even hopped in calm as ever. The entire ride home, he sat between us like nothing had happened. Back at the house, he was normal. Happy, hungry, tail wagging. The vet found nothing wrong. Blood work perfect. Behavior fine. Everyone said we must have imagined it. That maybe a bear scent or territorial instinct set him off. That isolation and paranoia warped our thinking. Maybe. But I know what I saw. I know how he looked. And I still haven't unpacked the bag from that trip. It's still in the garage, still zipped shut, still covered in dirt from that cabin. Sometimes when I walk past it, Duke stares at it for a long, long time, and he doesn't blink. I've only told this story 3 times. Once to my sister, once to a therapist, and once to a Forest Service investigator who closed the case 5 minutes after I walked out the door. I know how it sounds, but it happened. Every twisted second of it. It started as a birthday trip. My girlfriend Dana booked a remote cabin up in the Colorado highlands. Off-grid, off-map, she said. No cell service, no other cabins for miles, and just the 2 of us. I should have been thrilled. She went all out for me. Stocked the car with beers and steaks. Got us a brand new tent for our hikes. Even brought her telescope. I remember kissing her on the shoulder and saying, "This is going to be the best weekend of my life." It was, until the heat came. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon, late October. Fall clung to the trees like brittle fire, red, orange as golds. The drive took us deeper into the mountains than I'd ever been. Gravel turned to dirt, and dirt turned to a barely road. We passed no one, no gas stations, no hikers, no cabins. When we finally reached it, the cabin looked like something from a postcard. Old timber, a pitched roof, a porch facing an alpine lake that glistened under the gray sky. There was no electricity, but the solar water heater worked, and the propane tank was half full. That first night was perfect. Cold air, warm blankets, her head on my chest as the fire popped and hissed. But the next morning, something felt very wrong. It was hot, not warm, hot. I woke up sweating. The windows were fogged and the air felt like it belonged in a sauna. I stumbled outside, expecting to see the sun blazing overhead, but the sky was overcast, no sun in sight. Still, the heat hit me like a wall. My breath came shallow. The forest shimmered like a mirage, waves of distortion dancing above the dirt. I remember looking at Dana and saying, "It feels like August in Arizona." She wiped sweat from her neck. Maybe a heat wave? We checked our phones with no signal. No weather reports, just the silence of the trees. The thermometer we found in the shed read 109 Fahrenheit. We tried to ignore it. We went for a short hike into the lake, thinking it might be cooler near the water. But even the lake was warm. The mud steamed under our boots. We lasted 20 minutes before retreating back to the cabin soaked in sweat. That's when we noticed the candles. We'd brought a few big wax candles for the cabin. Dana loved the ambiance, but now they started to slouch, bent in half, puddling at their bases. The chocolate bars in our cooler were soup. The propane canister was hissing. I shut it off immediately. By late afternoon, it was 1:15 inside the cabin. We opened all the windows and doors, but no breeze came. Dana pulled out her phone. Still no service. Maybe it's some geothermal event. There are hot springs in the Rockies, right? I didn't answer. I was staring at the trees. They were sweating. I don't know how else to describe it. The bark gleamed with moisture, not from rain, but from within. Sap bubbled like boiling resin. Branches sagged. A few leaves dropped, curling and blackened, as if cooked from the inside out. That night, we tried to sleep outside. The tent was unbearable. The ground radiated heat like a stovetop. The next morning, we tried to leave. I loaded the bags in the car while Dana wiped sweat off her arms. Everything was sticky. The doors of the car groaned when I opened them. Rubber seals warped, interior vinyl soft to the touch. I put the key in the ignition, and nothing. No lights, no clicks, just silence. I popped the hood and nearly dropped the rod. Everything under the hood was warped. Tubing sagged, plastic covers bubbled. Even the metal had softened in places, drooping like taffy under the sun. But there was no sun. The clouds had only gotten darker. Dana touched the side mirror and yelped, blisters forming on her palm. I ran to her, took her hand, and that's when I realized our shoes were sinking. The dirt beneath our feet had softened, not mud, tar-like, sticky. The trees hissed quietly, a low crackling like meat on a skillet, and then I heard a sound I will never forget. A long, low creak, the roof of the cabin warping. I turned and saw the shingles bubbling, the wood beams bowed inward. Something inside the cabin was glowing orange, a heat that didn't make sense. That's when we ran. We took only water in a backpack, left the car, left the food, left everything, just ran downhill, thinking maybe if we got low enough, the air would cool. But it didn't. The farther we went, the worse it got. Birds lay dead on the ground, squirrels charred, trees cracked open like bursting pipes, spraying sap so hot it hissed when it hit the rocks. We walked all day and drank every drop of water we had. By dusk, we found a ranger's trail marker, faded and half melted, but still legible. It pointed downhill towards something called Carver's Fork. We followed it blindly, skin burning under the clouds. We never found a town, just more forest, now smoldering, just more heat, rising. That night, the ground glowed in patches, bright orange beneath the dirt, like there was something alive underground, something shifting. Dana cried herself to sleep. I held her, watched the trees lean in. The smell was the worst part. Not smoke, not fire, cooking meat. I woke alone, and Dana was gone. No footprints, no note, just the bottle of water beside her sleeping bag. I screamed her name for hours. I wandered for what felt like days before I found the road. A rescue team found me, dehydrated and burned. I was 40 pounds lighter, covered in heat blisters. They said it was 42 Fahrenheit that morning. No heat wave, no geothermal event. And when they got back, they showed the GPS coordinates I gave them, and there was no cabin. No melted car, no warped trees, just untouched forest and cold air. They think I hallucinated the whole thing. But when I finally got my phone back, there was a photo on it. Just one. A blurry image of Dana, her face sweaty and scarred, backlit by something bright. And behind her, on the porch of the cabin, the wooden railing had folded over itself like paper. The trees behind her were dripping. They say the forest has a rhythm, a pulse, and if you're out there long enough, you start to feel it. You stop walking through it like a visitor and start listening, like something being watched. Trees whisper, wind hums, and every once in a while you stumble onto something that was never meant to be found. That's what happened the summer of '92. Back when I was part of a 6-man crew working a contract deep in the Bitterroot Mountains, closest town was over 60 miles west, and we were dropped in by truck with enough fuel, gear, and canned beans to last 3 weeks. We were cutting old growth cedar, slow, brutal work in the heat. Chain oil in your nose, sap on your arms, lungs full of dust and bark. But we didn't complain. Not then, not before we found the cabin. It was our 7th day. Reggie, one of the newer guys, went off trail to relieve himself. Came back 20 minutes later, pale as paper. "I saw someone," he said. We laughed at first. "You hallucinating again, Reg?" "I'm serious," he insisted. "There's a cabin right up past the East Ridge, lady in a sun hat, gardening." That wiped the smiles off our faces. A woman out here? Didn't make sense. There were no roads, no neighbors, no signs of any other camps. We figured maybe he'd stumbled on some abandoned homestead from the 1800s and the sun was playing tricks on him. But Reggie swore. So after the day's work, we grabbed our gear and went looking. The hike took about 40 minutes through thick underbrush and ferns, the sun slanting low behind the pines. And sure enough, there it was. A small cabin nestled in a clearing, like it had grown there. It was too perfect to be abandoned. Smoke curling from a narrow chimney, flower beds carved with care, and a little split-rail fence that surrounded a lush garden, green and ripe with vegetables and herbs. And there, bent over the soil, was a woman. She wore a wide straw hat, a long black shirt, with sleeves rolled to her elbow. Her arms were long, thin, and pale. She moved slowly, deliberately, tending rows of carrots. She didn't look up. "Ma'am?" Nate called out. She didn't react, just kept digging. We exchanged glasses. I stepped forward and said louder, "Ma'am, we didn't mean to intrude. We're loggers working west of here. Didn't know anyone else was out here." Finally, she stood, turned, and smiled. That smile struck with me like a nail in the boot. Not because it was friendly, because it was too wide, too white. Her lips stretched too far, like they'd practiced that expression in front of a mirror for years. She spoke, voice soft as cotton. "Welcome. You boys lost?" "No, ma'am," I said slowly. "Just curious. This place isn't on any of our maps." She wiped her hands on her apron. "It's not supposed to be." She invited us in. We hesitated, but Nate, ever the brave one, said, "Come on, what's the worst that could happen?" and stepped through the door. The cabin was cool, dark, and smelled of earth. No lights, just candles and windows open to the dusk. Dried herbs hung from the rafters. A kettle whistled quietly on the stove, though we hadn't heard it earlier. The woman moved silently. Gracefully, she offered us tea. Reggie refused. I pretended to sip. Nate drank half a cup. "You live out here alone?" I asked. "I have the garden," she said. "That's more than enough." I glanced outside. The trees pressed against the clearing like they were holding their breath. When we left, she followed us to the edge of the trail. Didn't say goodbye, just stared as we disappeared back into the trees. No one said much that night, but by morning Nate was sick. Sweating, shivering, mumbling in his sleep. We thought it was the flu. Gave him water, let him rest, but he only got worse. His skin grew gray and waxy. His fingernails cracked, and every so often he whispered in a voice that wasn't his. "The roots go deep. They feed her. She won't let me go." We tried to carry him out, but didn't get far. On the third night, Nate completely vanished. We found drag marks in the dirt leading toward the ridge, and the worst part? There were no footprints, just furrows in the soil, like he'd been pulled by vines. We followed the trail back to the cabin. It looked older now, weathered. The fence was broken, the garden overgrown, wilted plants twisted up from cracked earth like hands. But she was still there, kneeling, digging. Except she wasn't using a towel anymore. She was using her hands. Blood ran down her forearms into the soil. We called out. She didn't look up. Reggie screamed and ran. We didn't stop him. I think we should have. I think it got him too. Only 3 of us made it back to camp. We radioed for evac. By the time the chopper came, only I was still awake. The others had gone quiet. Their eyes were open, but they weren't blinking. As the helicopter lifted, I looked down at the forest, at the clearing, and of course, there was no cabin. Just trees, dark and thick. But I swear I saw movement among them. A figure in a wide-brimmed hat, tending something in the dirt. That was 30 years ago. I haven't gone back to the mountains, not once. Every spring I dig a garden in my backyard. I wear gloves, I plant shallow, and I never, ever let the roots grow too deep. Because sometimes at night, I hear Nate's voice in the soil beneath my window. "She grows things, Eli. Things with eyes. They see me. And now, I finally see them." We should have turned back when the weather shifted. That's the part I keep coming back to. If we just trusted our guts instead of the map, we might have gotten out of those woods without anyone dying. But we were young, dumb, cocky, fresh out of college and itching for an adventure, with no cell signal, no distractions, and no backup. There were 4 of us. Me, my best friend Jordan, my girlfriend Lena, and Jordan's cousin Tom. We'd planned a week-long backpacking trip through the backcountry, staying off the main trails and camping along ridges most hikers don't bother with. Day 4 is when we found the cabin, and that's when everything went completely wrong. We were supposed to cross Black Elk Ridge that morning, but a thunderstorm rolled in fast and hard, the kind that turns the forest into a swamp and whites out all sense of direction. Visibility dropped maybe 50 feet, and our gear was soaked by noon. We were looking for high ground to set up camp when Lena spotted something through the trees. "Is that a roof?" We pushed through brambles and saplings until we reached it. A squat log cabin, maybe 30 feet wide, sunken into the hillside like it had grown there. The The wood was dark with rot, and the tin roof looked like it had been taking a beating from decades of falling branches and snow. One window was broken, and the door hung crooked, with no signs of life. "What the heck?" Jordan grinned. "Perfect shelter." I hesitated. "We shouldn't go in." "Dude, it's abandoned," he said. "Look at it." It looked abandoned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't, that it had just been waiting. We stepped inside. We were hit with that thick, musty smell of mold, mice, and wet wood. The interior was sparse. Dirt floor, broken table, a small hearth caked in ash. A cast iron stove sat in one corner, rusted shut. There was a loft, but the ladder was missing. The only light came through the cracks in the walls and the busted window. We dropped our packs and peeled off wet layers. "We'll dry off, make dinner, head out first thing," Tom said. "No harm done." We believed that, for a little while. But there were details that didn't sit right, like the fresh pile of firewood stacked behind the stove, or the meat hooks hanging from the ceiling, polished clean, or the cot in the corner with a pillow that wasn't rotten, covered in a dirty sheet that smelled faintly of sweat. The sun was barely down when the first shot rang out. Crack! A hole punched through the wooden wall 6 inches from Jordan's head. We hit the floor screaming. I saw a second round tear through Lena's backpack, spilling her clothes and snacks across the floor. Tom yelled, "Someone's out there!" "Yeah, we know, buddy," I screamed, crawling toward for cover. Another shot blasted through the window. We were trapped. No power, no phones, one entrance. No way to tell how many people were out there, or who they were. But we didn't hear voices, just breathing, heavy, wet breathing, and footsteps outside, slow, measured, and crunching through wet leaves. We used what we had, flipped the broken table as a barrier, piled crates by the window and stayed low. We had 2 pocket knives, 1 hatchet, and a bear spray canister. That was it. "I thought it was abandoned," Jordan whispered. I didn't answer. I just kept thinking about the meat hooks, the cot, the firewood. This was someone's home, and we'd barged in like it was a ranger station. More shots came over the next hour, never close enough to hit us, just reminders, warnings, psychological warfare. And then it stopped. Dead quiet. No wind, no bugs, no footsteps. It wasn't until just before midnight we saw him. He stepped into the clearing during a lightning flash. He looked ancient but not weak, wiry and tall, with a shaggy gray beard and a coat made of stitched animal hides. He held a long bolt-action rifle, like it was a part of his arm, and he was staring at the cabin, like we were the ones who didn't belong in this world anymore. Another shot, this one into the roof. A warning, not a kill shot. He wasn't hunting us. He was toying with us. Lena started to cry. We knew we wouldn't last until morning unless we made a move, so we formed a desperate plan. I'd throw Lena's sleeping bag out the door as a distraction. Jordan and Tom would run wide around the tree line to flank him. I'd grab Lena and bolt in the other direction. 3, 2, 1, crack! The door exploded as a round slammed through it. Tom screamed. We ran away. I grabbed Lena and tore through the trees. I don't remember the next few minutes. Just crashing branches, my breath burning, the sound of her sobs behind me. We didn't stop running until we reached a ravine and collapsed behind a fallen log. Jordan made it out. Tom didn't. He took a round through the thigh and bled out behind the cabin. We found his body later, stripped of gear, eyes wide open. The hermit was gone, and so was the cabin. When we led the rangers back 2 days later, there was nothing in that clearing, just scorched earth and dead trees. No structure, no sign of a man, no bullet holes in Lena's pack, no blood where Tom fell. The ranger patted my shoulder and said, "It happens sometimes. Old mining shacks come and go. You sure you weren't dehydrated? You kids get scared and imagine things out here?" Imagine things? I still have the bullet. I dug it out of my boot heel 2 days later, and at night, I sometimes hear that rifle. Crack, pause, crack. And I know he's still out there, waiting for someone else to walk through the trees and say, "Hey, look, an abandoned cabin." Almost like he set it up that way. Almost like what happened to Tom was his plan all along. And sometimes I wonder if he could have taken all of us, if he really wanted to. We bought the cabin to get away from everything. It wasn't fancy, Just a 2-room box tucked into the forest near Glacier National Park, with a porch that sagged a little and windows that whistled when the wind blew hard. But we loved it, me and Callie, just the two of us and our rescue mutt, Beans. The place sat 4 miles up a private trail with no neighbors, no traffic, and no noise. That first summer, it felt like paradise. We grilled, we fished, we lay on the dock with beers and counted stars until we fell asleep in the grass. It was easy to forget the cabin sat in bear country, until one night, a mama bear reminded us. Late September brought the first cold snap. That's when the bears started bulking up for winter, eating scavenging, getting bold. We heard distant growls some nights. Once I saw a black bear moving through the trees at dusk, but nothing came close. Then we found the prints. Massive tracks deep in the mud, leading around the back of the cabin and towards the trash enclosure. The bungee cord in the bin was snapped in half. The can was tipped and something had dug through the scraps like it knew what it was looking for. "I thought you bear-proofed these," Callie said. "I did. That's steel reinforced." Whatever did it had power and purpose. It was cold that night. Cold enough we shut the windows and locked the front door tight. The wind howled a little, and the trees rustled like dry bones against the roof. Beans curled up at the foot of the bed. Callie was reading with a headlamp. I was half asleep already when I heard something. A scrape, not outside, but under the floor. I sat up, heart kicking. "Did you hear that?" Callie nodded slowly. "Something's under the cabin." Another noise, closer now. A deep thud, like something heavy testing its weight against the subfloor. Then something even worse. A low, throaty growl. And this time, Beans growled back, quietly, ears flat. I grabbed the flashlight, heart hammering, and crept toward the living room. The floorboards felt oddly soft, not structurally, just wrong, like the air pressure had changed. Then came the crash. The wall behind the wood stove exploded inward. I barely had time to register what I thought I was seeing. A heavying black mass, a blur of fur and teeth, snarling and smashing through, like it had been waiting for us to settle in. A grizzly, not just any bear, massive, furious, and frantic. She let out a roar that shook the cabin. Splinters flew, the couch flipped, Beans bolted, barking wildly, and Callie screamed as the bear lunged for the kitchen, tearing through chairs like matchsticks. I grabbed Callie and dragged her towards the bedroom, slamming the door behind us, just as the bear tore into the pantry. It sounded like a bomb going off, cans flying, jars shattering. She was looking for food, but she wasn't calm. She was panicked, like she was trapped, cornered, like she thought we'd taken something from her. We pushed the dresser in front of the door, piled everything heavy we could find against it. Then silence. Just heavy, huffing breaths from the other side. Deep animal breaths. She knew we were in there. Something bumped the door. Soft, testing. Then came some crazy sounds I could never imagine hearing. A roar so close, so deep, that it felt like it came from inside my lungs. The door bowed inward. She was trying to get through. "Up!" I shouted. "The loft!" We scrambled up the ladder into the crawl-space attic, barely tall enough to sit in, but it was an old hatch window facing the roof. The bear slammed against the door again. Wood cracked. Then it was quiet. Too quiet. We lay there in the attic, barely breathing. That's when Callie said, "Why is she doing this? They don't act like this." She was right. Bears don't break into cabins unless they smell food. They don't stalk humans. Unless... Something below us. A yelp. Beans. Then another roar, followed by a horrible, wet sound I won't describe. I think part of me broke in that moment. Rage, grief, fear, it all blurred together. And then I heard it. The second growl. Smaller, high-pitched. It wasn't just the mama in the cabin. She'd brought her cub. We had to get out. Callie and I whispered a plan. I'd drop down and light the old emergency flare by the stove, then make a run for the hatch in the pantry floor that led to the crawl space and out the back wall. We counted to 3. I dropped down. The cabin was ruined. Blood, food, smashed glass. The bear was gone from the room, but I could hear her breathing from the hallway. I lit the flare. The sudden red blaze lit the room. The bear roared from the shadows and raged and charged. I threw the flare into the living room rug and dove into the crawl space. The last thing I saw was her back, scarred, covered in old wounds, ribs showing through thick fur, as she turned toward the fire, not afraid, protective. Callie climbed down after me. We crawled through mud, stone, and squeezed through the back vent. The bear never followed. Maybe she was focused on the fire, or the cub, but we ran. Barefoot in our pajamas, through black pine woods with no flashlight, scratched, bleeding, hearts pounding. We didn't stop until we saw the headlights of our truck, a mile down the service road. We called the Rangers. They found the cabin gutted. The fire had burned slow, mostly smoke damage, no bear, but they found prints, massive ones, leading in through the wall, and smaller ones too, cub-side, inside the cabin, inside. The ranger, older guy, maybe 60, just stared at us for a long time before saying she wasn't hunting. She thought you trapped her baby inside. She was trying to rescue it. But one silver lining, we found Beans. He was a little scratched up, cut on the side of his ear, but he was okay and well alive. He must have fought back or ran or hid, we're not sure, but we sure did hear that scratch, and we thought it was much worse than it was. But he survived, that tough little guy. We never went back, however, not alone, not together, especially not with Beans. I still wake up sweating when I hear a branch snap outside. Sometimes I dream of breathing, hot, heavy animal breathing, just outside the door. But the worst part? Sometimes I hear a second breath behind it, smaller and angry. I've done delivery for 7 years. Late nights, backwoods, rough weather, you name it. You learn early on to trust your gut more than the GPS. If a place feels off, it is off. But this time I didn't listen. I don't think I'll ever be right again. It was early November, cold and gray. Right after daylight, saving time kicked in. I was covering rural drops north of Montville, small mountain towns, mostly camps and farmhouses. Around 6 p.m., my phone buzzed with a last-minute delivery. No business name, just an address and the note. Please deliver directly to the door. Leave nowhere else. I almost skipped it. I'd already done 14 stops, but it was my last one, and the package wasn't big. Shoebox-sized, wrapped in old-fashioned brown paper and tied with twine. No return label. The GPS didn't recognize the address. When I punched in the coordinates manually, it plotted a route that twisted into a network of thin back roads. I should have stopped there. The asphalt gave out after 10 minutes. My van jostled onto a gravel road so narrow, branches scraped the mirrors. I hadn't seen another house in miles, and the woods were getting thicker and darker. I could feel the air grow colder through the vents. About 20 minutes in, the gravel turned to dirt. I slowed to a crawl. Fog hung between the trees like spider silk. My headlights barely pierced it. Then, my GPS froze. The screen locked on a blank section of map with no roads, no markers, just a pale gray void. The van lost signal. I looked down at the package, still sitting on the seat beside me, still tied neatly with twine. I nearly turned around until I saw it. A light flickering ahead through the fog, orange and faint. The dirt road ended at a clearing, overgrown with moss and dead leaves. A cabin sat at the far end, leaning sunken, the wood black with age. A lantern glowed behind one of the windows, casting moving shadows. I pulled up slowly, engine rumbling. No driveway, no mailbox, just forest pressing in like it wanted to swallow the place whole. I grabbed the package and stepped out. The ground was soft, spongy. My boots sank slightly, like something rotten lay just under the soil. The air smelled sweet and wrong. I knocked once. The door creaked open by itself, just a crack. No footsteps, no voice, just that flickering lantern inside swaying like it was hanging from someone's hand. I stood there a long time, package in hand. Then I said, "Hello? I've got a delivery here." No answer, but something moved inside. Not a person exactly, just movement. Shadows shifting in a way they shouldn't. I squinted, heart hammering, and realized the lantern was swinging, but nothing was holding it. That's when I turned to leave. But the van's headlights were off. I hadn't touched them. Then they blinked on, off, on again, then stayed off. I backed away from the porch, clutching the package. The door swung open wider behind me with a slow creak. I spun around and the hallway beyond was black. No light, no furniture, just a long, narrow space that felt deeper than the outside of the cabin should allow. My heart told me to run. My brain said, just deliver it, get it over with. So I walked inside. The air inside was heavy, dust and cinnamon, but behind it, a sharp metallic scent, copper. The lantern hung from a nail in the ceiling, swaying as if someone had just let go. There were photos all over the walls, black and white portraits, dozens, maybe hundreds, but all the faces had been scratched out, eyes gouged with something sharp, names scribbled underneath, faded and smeared. I looked down at the package. The handwriting on the address label looked identical. Then a voice spoke, from the hallway behind me, low, croaking, female. "Is that for me?" I turned slowly. She stood just beyond the lantern light, tall, thin, wearing a great dress that hung from her like it had been buried. Her hair was long, dark, and clung to her face like cobwebs. Her eyes too wide, her mouth too small. She smiled barely and stepped closer. I tried to hand her the package, but my arm wouldn't move. I tried again, fingers shaking, locked. She kept staring, as if waiting for something. "I've been waiting a long time," she said. I don't remember dropping the box. I just remember it bursting open when it hit the floor. Inside was a photo of me. Not current, an old yearbook shot, my name written underneath, eyes scratched out. I turned to run. I don't know how I got out. I remember trees, branches slashing at my face, headlights blinking in the fog. Somehow I got the van started. The GPS came back online 10 miles later. The route redrew like the road behind me had never existed. When I got back to the warehouse, I asked about the delivery. No one had logged it. No such address on file. No return information. No signature required. Just a route that shouldn't have been there. I quit the job a week later, but sometimes late at night, I'll check the app just to make sure it's not there. That address, those coordinates. But every few weeks it shows up again for a moment, then disappears. And when it does, I always hear her voice. "I've been waiting," in that same tone, terrifying me, chilling me to the bone, because I know that house was real, and I know there must still be something out there. I should have known something was wrong when the gas station attendant gave me that look. You know the kind. The one where someone wants to say something but decides it's better not to. He stared at me while wiping the same patch of counter for what felt like a full minute after I asked for directions. "Old Ridge Road," he repeated. "Don't think you want to take the kids that way." I laughed nervously. "Google Maps says the fastest route to the campground. Just a scenic detour, right?" He didn't laugh back, just shrugged and muttered, "Fastest way to get turned around, more like." Then he tapped the counter twice. "Good luck, mister." I should have listened. We were supposed to be at Winding Pines by sundown. My wife Laura had made a full itinerary, roasting marshmallows with our daughter Emily, stargazing with our son Josh. Nothing fancy, just family time before school started again. But we got a late start, and by the time we reached the detour, it was already past 6. The gravel road was narrower than I expected, barely wide enough for our SUV. Tall pines pressed in on both sides, their branches brushing the windows like fingers. There were no signs, no markers, just miles and miles of wilderness. "This doesn't look right," Laura said, checking the map again. The GPS had long since lost signal. "We're fine," I lied. "We'll be at the site in 20, 30 minutes tops." But 20 minutes turned into an hour, then 2. The road started to twist, climb, then drop. I swore we passed the same drowned tree twice. Even the kids noticed. "Dad?" Emily whispered. "Are we lost?" I didn't answer. It was pitch dark by the time the engine sputtered out. We were deep in the hills with no cell service, no light except for our headlights, and a quarter tank of gas left. I got out, checked the tires. Nothing flat, just stuck on some incline too steep for our front wheels to grip. Laura was panicking. Josh had started crying. I tried to stay calm. "We'll walk. There's got to be a cabin or a ranger station nearby. People hike these woods, right?" wrong. We took only essentials, a flashlight, water bottles, some snacks. I carried Emily while Josh trudged beside me. Laura kept glancing back at the dark woods behind us, hearing things I was trying to ignore. We walked for maybe an hour when we saw it. A faint glow through the trees, warm yellow light, flickering like firelight. A cabin. It sat crooked on a stone foundation, roof sloping as if it might collapse. Smoke puffed lazily from the chimney. The front porch sagged under its own weight, but the lights were on, and that was all we cared about. I knocked. No answer. Knocked again, harder this time. The door creaked open on its own. "Hello?" I called. "We're lost. We have children with us. We just need to use a phone." Silence. Then a voice from deeper inside. "Come on in. Ain't got a phone, but y'all can get warm." Laura grabbed my arm. "Daniel?" We were too cold, too tired, too desperate to argue. The interior was stranger than I expected. Dozens of antlers lined the walls. Animal skulls sat on shelves. A bear pelt stretched across the floor like a rug. Through the head was still attached. Eyes glassy, teeth bared. There were no electric lights, only lanterns and candles. The man who greeted us looked like he'd walked out of another century. Stringy graying hair, patchy beard, clothes worn to the point of being rags. His eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen. "Name's Whitaker," he said. "Y'all just make yourselves at home." He poured something from a kettle, offered cups to the kids. I declined politely. Laura didn't. "Live out here alone?" I asked. "Oh no," he said, smiling. "Family's around. They just shy new folks." As if on cue, I heard a thump from the back room, then whispering. Laura stiffened. Did you hear that?" Whitaker didn't react, just stirred his tea. "Kids," I said, standing, "let's step outside for a second." But when I opened the front door, I froze. 3 figures stood at the edge of the clearing, ragged clothes, long hair, bare feet in the cold dirt, just staring. One of them, a woman maybe, tilted her head like a confused animal. I shut the door fast. Whitaker was still smiling. "Told ya. Family's around." What happened next is a blur of panic. I grabbed the kids and pulled Laura toward the back door, but it was barred from the outside. Then, the windows went dark. Someone had snuffed the lanterns. The only light left came from the fire, and even that started to die. "They always come back this time of year," Whitaker murmured behind me. "Always need new blood." Laura screamed. One of the family was climbing through the window. Their face, I don't know how to describe it, like a mask stretched too tight, eyes too close together, mouth too wide. They didn't say anything, just reached for Emily. I swung the fireplace poker, felt it crack bone. We ran. Somehow we made it out the front door, ran into the woods blind, me carrying Josh this time, Laura dragging Emily behind us. We had heard the others giving chase, shuffling, laughing, calling out in voices too broken to understand. We didn't stop until the sun rose. Eventually we found the road. A hunter found us an hour later, called the Rangers. When they went back to the cabin, it was gone. Not just empty, gone. No chimney, no foundation. Nothing but a clearing with a ring of burnt grass in the center. They said we got turned around, hallucinated, exposed to something toxic in the woods, that it was all in our heads. But we know what we saw. Every year since, I've had the same dream. The cabin, the family, and the Whitaker's voice whispering behind my ear, "Don't worry, we'll find you again next season." I hike alone. It's not a statement of pride, just fact. Always have. I don't do trails with names, and I sure don't follow those cooler coded signs. The whole point for me is to get lost just a little, to feel like I'm somewhere no one else has stood in 100 years. The only problem with going that far off grid is sometimes you find things no one else has found in 100 years, and sometimes there's a reason for that. It started like any other trip. Early October, leaves dying bright and loud, the air clean and cold, in that way you can taste. I was somewhere in northern Vermont, past the edge of a state forest I won't name, not because I'm worried about giving away my spot, but because I don't think anyone should go looking for what I found. 3 days in, I'd covered about 20 miles of unmarked terrain, mostly hills, thick hardwoods, scattered boulders, No cell service, no GPS, just map, compass, and instinct. That third evening, it started raining earlier than expected. Cold, heavy drops that came fast and thick, soaking me to the bone before I could even unroll my tarp. I knew I wouldn't make it through the night like that, not dry anyway, so I went searching for shelter. I found it just past dusk. A cabin, tucked behind a thicket of pines like it didn't want to be found. No trail leading to it, no sign of recent life, just this rotting thing squatting among the trees, like the woods had tried to swallow it and failed. One look and I knew it was old, decades at least. Roof sagging, shutters hanging loose, moss and vines overtaking the logs. But it had 4 walls and a roof, and in that moment, that was all I needed. I didn't knock. Why would I? No lights, no smoke, no footprints. Just a dead place in a living forest. Or so I thought. The inside was off. I don't know how else to say it. It didn't smell right. Not like mold or rot. It smelled sweet, faintly, like a bowl of fruit left out too long. There were personal items inside. A cracked porcelain teacup on a shelf. A child's shoe, small and white, under the table. A chair with one leg snapped off, still upright against the wall. And then I saw her. She was standing in the far corner of the single-room cabin, half in shadow. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, pale skin, dark wet hair clinging to her face, barefoot, wearing a thin white nightgown that looked 50 years old. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me. I froze. I don't scare easy. I've walked into dens of black bears without blinking. But this didn't make sense. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nothing. Not a twitch, not a blink. I stepped back toward the door without taking my eyes off her. "Is your family here?" Her head tilted slightly, like she didn't understand the question, and then suddenly, she smiled. I left. I didn't run, but I got out fast, into the rain, into the dark, back into the forest I suddenly didn't trust anymore. I set up camp maybe half a mile away. Couldn't sleep. Just lay in my wet sleeping bag, eyes open, heart pounding. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the light, maybe a mannequin, maybe someone's sick idea of a prank. But in my gut, I knew she was real, and I knew I shouldn't have left her. The next morning the storm had passed. I packed up, marched straight back to the cabin, and told myself I'd prove it was nothing. But the cabin was empty, dust undisturbed. No footprints, no cup, no shoe, no chair. And the corner where she'd stood, cobwebs so thick I'd have to cut through them to stand there. I should have left right then. Instead I explored. Behind the cabin was a small cellar door, half buried, hidden under a layer of pine needles. Something about it called to me. I opened it. The stairs creaked and moaned, but I went down anyway, into darkness, into a smell I can't describe. Sweet, yes, but rancid too, like syrup poured over rot. There were jars on the shelves, dozens of them, old mason jars filled with cloudy liquid, and inside each one, floating shapes, little animals, squirrels, frogs, birds, all preserved, their eyes open, watching. In the center of the room was a child-sized bed, and on the bed, something wrapped in a white nightgown. My stomach turned, but before I could step closer, I heard something behind me, a whisper. "You weren't supposed to find me again." I turned fast. She was there, standing on the bottom step, the girl, but her smile was gone. Her head twitched once, then again, faster like a glitch. Her arms hung limp, but her fingers moved, tapping, like she was playing invisible piano keys. I backed away. She stepped forward. "I tried to be quiet," she whispered. "I tried to sleep." She was crying now, but her eyes were dry. Then she lifted one hand and pointed behind me. "But they won't let me." I turned. Every jar on the shelves was shattered. The air buzzed, hummed, like static under my skin. And then I ran. I don't know how I made it out. I don't remember the trail. I don't remember how I found the road or flagged down the ranger who drove me into town. I just remember the feeling of being followed the whole way, like something was brushing against the back of my neck. They found the cabin, but it wasn't like I saw it. No cellar, no jars, no bed, just an old logging shack collapsed in on itself, burned decades ago. They said no child had lived there since the 1930s. A family had gone missing, parents and one daughter never found. I know what I saw, and I know this: that girl isn't dead. She's waiting. I don't know if I believe in ghosts. I didn't anyway, not before that weekend. I believed in trespassing laws, in old cabins falling apart in the woods, in the way the forest can mess with your senses if you're alone too long, but not ghosts. Now I don't know what to believe. I'd just gone through a bad breakup, the kind that doesn't end in shouting matches or broken dishes, just a slow, heavy silence until someone finally says, "I can't do this anymore," and walks out. I needed air, space, time, whatever word people use when they don't want to admit they're running. So I drove up north. I had this idea in my head about roughing it for a few days, me, my backpack, and miles of forest. It was supposed to be simple, quiet, healing even. I parked at an old trailhead I found on a forum, one that hadn't been maintained since the 80s. Packed light, slept under the stars for the first night, drank straight from the stream, boiled in my dented old pot. It felt good. Second night, the weather turned. It didn't storm exactly, but the sky got mean. Low gray clouds pressing down on the canopy. A wind that seemed to breathe rather than blow. I figured I'd better find shelter before it got worse. That's when I saw it. The cabin was maybe a quarter mile off trail, half swallowed by brush and moss, 2 stories tall, but sagging. The front door hung open at a bad angle, like it had been kicked in long ago. I paused about 50 feet away, just looking. I felt wrong. I mean that in a primal way, like something in my bones was telling me not to go closer. But I told myself it was just a structure, a lucky find, shelter from the coming wind. I stepped inside. The air was colder in there, dry but not clean, dust and rot, and something faintly sweet like a dead bouquet. There were still things inside, furniture mostly, a table covered in mold, a couch with stuffing spilling from the cushions. On the far wall, a stone fireplace with a few charred logs still in the grate. It looked like no one had touched it in years, but also like someone had only just left. There was a staircase to the second floor, but I didn't go up. Something about the way the wood groaned above me felt like a warning, so I stayed downstairs, made a small fire, and ate a granola bar. I told myself I'd sleep lightly, just until the weather passed, but I must have nodded off. Something woke me around 3 a.m. Not a sound, not at first, just a feeling, like when someone's watching you. I sat up slowly. The fire was dying, casting more shadows than light. Then I heard it, a creak directly above me. Floorboards. I froze. Another step, then another. Someone was walking upstairs. I stared at the ceiling, trying to breathe quietly, trying to convince myself it was the wind, a tree limb, anything. But the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate. And then they stopped, right above me, dead center. I didn't move for a long time. Eventually I got up and quietly fed the fire. The light flared, pushing back some of the shadows in the corners of the room. That's when I noticed the picture frames on the far wall. 5 of them, all the same family. A man, a woman, and 3 children. 2 boys, 1 girl. Judging by the clothes, the photos were from the late 1960s. They looked normal, happy even, but the longer I stared, the more wrong they seemed, like their smiles didn't reach their eyes. In one of the photos, the girl was holding something. I stepped closer. It was a doll. No, not a doll. A rabbit, sewn by hand, worn but loved. Its eyes were mismatched buttons. I felt sick, because that rabbit, I'd seen it earlier. It was sitting in the far corner of the room when I walked in. Now it was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, just sat by the fire waiting for light. The footsteps never came back, but I heard other things. A soft thump from upstairs, the faint creak of a door, breathing that wasn't mine. I waited until the sun broke through, and then I left. Didn't pack, didn't eat, just walked fast and steady until I hit the road. I didn't look back. Weeks later, I told a buddy about the place. He's big into local history and was able to pull some old land records. The cabin was owned by a family in 1967. They went missing one winter. Whole family. never found. Police thought maybe they got snowed in and froze to death, or tried to hike out and got lost. The house was left untouched after the search was called off. People tried to buy the land later, but no one held on to it for long. Locals said the place was cursed. Said sometimes hikers go up there and never come back down. So yeah, I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I'll tell you this much. Whatever was walking around upstairs that night, it wasn't empty. And whatever it was, it knew I didn't belong there.